Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is David Medina, and I am the co-founder and COO of Results for America. Thanks for joining us today for our 98th session, which we developed in collaboration with our partners at Bloomberg Philanthropies and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the Local Infrastructure Hub is a national program that connects cities and towns with the resources and expert advice you need to access federal infrastructure funding in order to help drive local progress, improve your communities, and deliver results for your residents. And through this hub, city and town leaders like all of you can access hands-on grant application training to secure funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. You also get hands-on grant implementation workshops from us, one-on-one office hours, and other actionable resources. And you can find all of this information on our website, localinfrastructure.org. Today's session is focused on how you can work with your states to leverage the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to access financing for and implement projects like wastewater treatment, stormwater management, habitat restoration, water conservation and reuse, and contaminated site cleanup. So please note that the federal fund we'll be discussing today doesn't support drinking water projects. If you're interested in learning more about how to secure federal funds for drinking water treatment to help fix leaky or old pipes or improve water supply resources, please join us for our next webinar, and that'll be on November 4th next week. And we'll be focusing specifically on the Federal Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So that's on November 4th. I'd now like to introduce our featured policy expert today, Cynthia Kohler. Cynthia is the executive director of the Water Now Alliance, a network of local leaders advancing sustainable, affordable, and resilient water strategies in their communities. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia. Cynthia, take it away.
Thanks so much, David. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to David and Results for America for the invitation to be with you all today to talk about the Clean Water SRF. We have a fantastic panel, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Next slide. For those of you not familiar with Water Now, as David said, we are a nonprofit consultancy and a nationwide network of water leaders working to advance climate resilient, affordable, and sustainable strategies at the local level. We've worked with the National League of Cities since our launch about 10 years ago now, and we're very pleased to have been part of the Local Infrastructure Hub, supporting the Drinking Water and Clean State Water Revolving Fund boot camps as subject matter experts. Next slide. As most of you know, federal law established two SRFs, one under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the other as part of the Clean Water Act. Today, as David said, we'll be talking about the Clean Water SRF, which focuses on keeping pollution out of the nation's waterways. The SRF is a federal-state partnership, stay on that other slide for a minute, that provides low-cost borrowing to local systems. The program is designed to create in each state a perpetual source of financing for wastewater infrastructure. While the SRFs are the largest source of federal funding for water infrastructure nationwide, it's important to bear in mind that they are, for the most part, loan programs. Other than in very limited circumstances, they do not provide grants. However, it can provide grant-like dollars, which we'll talk about in just a minute. One thing to underscore for most of you here today, 95% of local water infrastructure is paid for at the local level. So these financing options are important. Okay, next slide. The principal objective of the Clean Water SRF is to provide low-cost financing for local projects addressing wastewater treatment and discharge, including stormwater management. The way it works is that Congress appropriates annual funding to EPA, which allocates funds to each state based on a formula. The state SRF programs then prepare their annual intended use plans, laying out their priorities and processes. Utilities submit applications for SRF loans, and the programs at the state level provide funds on a reimbursement basis. Next slide. State SRF programs are authorized to make loans as long as they can ensure that the interest rate for each loan is less than or equal to the market interest rate. For the most part, they're substantially less than market rate. The most current data available indicate that the national average for Clean Water Act SRF loans is just about a little under 2%, 1.9%. an incredibly good deal for ratepayers in light of municipal bond rates that have climbed to a national average of almost 4.5%. Amortized over the typical SRF 40-year payback time, the rate impacts of these loans is very, very low. Next slide. EPA's role in the SRF process focuses on setting the overall direction for the program. Clean water SRF allotments are based on state needs and population. EPA provides guidance and oversight of the state use of funding awards and provides general support to the SRF programs in the form of resources such as workshops and fact sheets, tools, answers to questions about eligibility and compliance. But the primary responsibility for running the SRFs and engaging with local decision makers and applicants like yourselves occurs at the state SRF program level. The states are empowered to identify their own priorities and eligibility requirements through their intended use plans. They design and manage their respective application processes, and they are the ultimate deciders when it comes to selecting projects for funding. The states also set interest rates and lending terms. They define green projects. They establish affordability criteria for disadvantaged communities and determine how any additional subsidies are distributed to the recipients. Two of these points are worth just another minute. Next slide. So to talk about the Green Reserve, since 2009, federal law has required that at least 10% of each state's clean water SRF funds must be allocated to what's known as the Green Reserve. That is, projects such as energy efficiency, water use efficiency, green infrastructure, or other projects that are environmentally innovative in some way. The key thing to note is that the Green Reserve is a floor, not a ceiling, so nothing limits the SRF's abilities to allocate substantially more than the 10% minimum to green projects. There can also be certain benefits to you in applying for your state's green SRF for greener projects. States have the discretion to offer various incentives. These can include priority scoring or lower interest rates, principal forgiveness, and more. Next slide. Another key issue as you're thinking about the Clean Water SRF is that the state programs also have the discretion to address affordability concerns somewhat by what is known as additional subsidy to communities that meet certain criteria. The concept is that the first subsidy is the below market rates that the SRFs are already offering. But Congress became concerned that even these lower rates would not alleviate the substantial economic pain for lower income ratepayers associated with the cost of infrastructure projects that are funded by the SRFs, which of course need to be reimbursed out of rates. So the idea of the additional subsidy is that when applying for a loan for, say, an expensive wastewater treatment facility, a utility can then ask the SRF program to provide additional subsidy, which would convert a portion of the loan into principal forgiveness, which would not need to be repaid. It becomes very complicated to explain why this is forgiveness and not just a grant, even though it operates like a grant. So we're going to skip over that for now. But you should feel free to reach out to Water Now or others if you want more information about that. Because these infrastructure costs, which is mainly what the SRFs are funding, are primary drivers of rate increases, a number of commentators have indicated that the additional subsidy provisions of the Clean Water Act and actually also the Safe Drinking Water Act are among the most important affordability mechanisms available to address the growing issue of water debt in many areas. The SRFs can offer additional subsidies in various ways, but for practical purposes, principal forgiveness is the primary way that it's employed. For the most part, additional subsidy is available to communities that meet affordability criteria on a state-by-state basis. However, the federal statute also authorizes SRF programs to provide additional subsidies for applicants that don't meet the affordability criteria, but are applying for projects that meet certain water or energy efficiency goals, mitigate stormwater runoff, or encourage sustainable project planning, design, and construction. Next slide. Okay, so getting to the eligibilities. The Clean Water SRF financing can be used for a very broad range of water quality focused projects, including all of those listed here and more. A hallmark of the Clean Water SRF is this flexibility. If you can demonstrate that a project protects water quality, you can likely find an eligibility category that fits. So these include publicly owned treatment works, energy conservation, water conservation, stormwater management, agricultural best management practices, on-site wastewater treatment, habitat protection, desal, groundwater protection, surface water protection, planning assessment, and even silviculture and more. Next slide. For the most part, the Clean Water SRF is intended to cover capital costs. So we're talking about equipment purchases, planning, design, and other pre-project costs, construction, development of an outreach program, trees and other plantings that are part of green stormwater infrastructure establishment, acquisition of land for the project, although note you cannot use SRF funds for the use for eminent domain, and certain project-related fees. Ineligible costs for the most part are annual expenses like O&M, salaries, benefits, that kind of thing, ordinary governmental or operating expenses. Next slide. So we'll spend just a couple of minutes going through the steps in the Clean Water SRF application project and eligibilities before turning to our panel for their success stories. Next slide. Governmental entities such as cities, towns, and public utilities responsible for wastewater treatment facilities are eligible. And so are private entities, some, nonprofits, citizen groups, who also have those responsibilities. For our purposes, if you are a public entity, whether a city or special district, you are likely eligible. Next slide. As I mentioned a minute ago, the SRF is available to fund a very wide range of projects that advance clean water and wastewater treatment goals. However, it is important that your project fit clearly into one of the specific eligibilities listed here. The ones in bold on the slide are only available to public agencies. So these 11, and you'll have all of these provided, include construction of publicly owned treatment works, non-point source management, anything having to do with the National Estuary Program, decentralized wastewater treatment systems of various kinds, stormwater management, conservation, efficiency or reuse, wastewater pilot projects, energy efficiency, reuse, security measures, which we'll talk about today, I think, a bit, and then technical assistance, specifically to owners and operators of small and medium-sized publicly owned treatment works. Some of these categories have additional eligibility requirements that are beyond the scope of what we can cover in this webinar, but Water Now and others are available to help you walk through those issues. Next slide. So when you're thinking about applying to your state's Clean Water SRF for support, it's important to think through your project's readiness from an eligibility perspective. So these aren't the only questions, but some key things to think about are, is the primary purpose of your project to improve water quality? Which of those 11 categories that we talked about does your project fit under? You want to have a clear slot for that. Where are you planning? Where are you in the planning and design process? Have you selected a firm to start doing the work for you? And what's your project schedule? Next slide. The other key step, and this is really critical, is getting to be familiar with your state's SRF program. EPA actually has a very handy website that you've got the link for. We can get you the link for the Clean Water SRF website, where you can find your state's contact email and phone number and website listing. You'll want to spend a fair amount of time on your state's SRF website. Look for guidance documents, program management, checklists. That's where you'll find upcoming deadlines, trainings, and resources. Submission deadlines vary widely. They can be annual, they can be rolling. Sometimes there's multiple opportunities. There's often a pre-application step, and the whole thing can take, depending on your state, between 12 and 18 months. Next slide, please. Community engagement is another important part of the SRF process and is required on a state-by-state basis. There will typically be a requirement where the applicant needs to outline public participation, including public meetings, when are they being held, where, as well as assurances that copies of the meeting minutes are publicly available. Community engagement can sometimes seem to be a burden for applicants, but it's also an important step in strengthening a project's credibility and can make the implementation go much more smoothly. Okay, with that, we can stop sharing the slides and move on to our panelists. We are so fortunate to have with us today many local leaders from around the nation to share their SRF stories. I'm very pleased to introduce Mayor Kathy Sheehan of Albany, New York, Chris Browning, Utilities Director for Oklahoma City, Lori Johnson, the Financial Assistance Division Chief for the State of Oklahoma Resources Control Board. Lori also serves on the board of CIFA, which is the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, which is the not-for-profit organization for the SRF programs, and Tony Parrott, the CEO of Louisville Jefferson County Metropolitan Sewer District. I want to thank you all for being with us. I'm going to throw out a series of questions. I wanted to start off by noting again that the Clean Water SRF financing can be used for so many different kinds of projects, including some you might not initially think about, like cybersecurity. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your project, but we're going to kick things off with Mayor Sheehan of Albany.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think we have slides to share because I'm a mayor and I can't help but brag on my city from time to time. The city of Albany has invested over $153 million in water quality. So this includes water and sewer infrastructure. This is a lot of dollars. In the previous, 25 years, the city invested 60 million. And so we wouldn't be able to do it without some of the resources that you're talking about. So I just want to stress how important that is. Next slide. That includes, replacing lead service lines. You can go to the next slide. We had a huge project that we did as part of a consent order with New York State to end centuries of untreated sewage being discharged into the Hudson River. So that was a spectacular project. I invite people to come look at it. But the project I'm going to talk about is one that really created a real change in our city. And you can go to the next slide. We're a very old city. We date to 1624. At one point, there's a creek here, Patroon Creek, Tivoli Lake. There was a reservoir there many, many years ago. If you go to the next slide, you can see that our city did what a lot of cities did. They decided to put the creek into a pipe and bury it. And so this is what it looked like after that project was done, and best of intentions. But what it created, and you can go to the next slide, was a desire on the part of people who lived in and around the Tivoli Preserve, which is in our West Hill neighborhood. It's formerly Red Line neighborhood. Low income, lots of challenges. They wanted to recreate a park that they could be proud of. And part of that visioning plan, and you talked about the importance of public input, incredibly important. We had this visioning plan, and so we could show that public input. You can go to the next slide. And so the dream was to open up and daylight this stream, and it was going to help with a number of issues, including polluted runoff going into the Hudson River and into that watershed, flooding that happened, flooding that would then go onto the rail lines and sometimes even flood the highway. So there were a lot of reasons, really good reasons to do this project. So you can go to the next slide. So we went from this to, you can go to the next slide, digging up the pipe. Next slide. Recreating this this stream, but doing it in a way, and you can go to the next slide, that anticipated that sometimes this is deluged with a lot of rain, a lot of water that comes down into this system. And you can go to the next slide, and it shows this is one of the flood overflow areas. So when this system works, this overflows into that Tivoli Lake. To again hold back water and prevent downstream pollution. So you can go to the next slide. And this is what it looks like now. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it's absolutely beautiful. The next slide, you'll see that we created wayfinding. You go to the next slide, we have infographics that tell the community why this is important, and what we did and why we did it. And it really was an incredible project. You can go to the next slide and kind of see it from above. And the train line along there carries the Amtrak train. And so my next dream is to find the money to put a big sign that says, "Welcome to Albany," because as the train goes by, you're seeing this beautiful park, this beautiful infrastructure, and you'd never know that you were in a city. So that was our project.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mayor. That was great. Chris, let's go to you. Just say a little bit about yourself and tell us about your project in Oklahoma.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm Chris Browning. I'm the general manager of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust. So, Cynthia, you listed a whole array of various projects that could be funded through Clean Water SRF, and we've taken advantage of quite a few of those since 2009. We have actually received SRF funding, Clean Water SRF funding, for 12 different groups of projects, not just single projects. Over the years, our Oklahoma Water Resources Board is the administrator of that program here in Oklahoma. And so we are currently the largest customer of the Water Resources Board and the SRF program, with nearly $700 million in SRF loans over the years. The one that I'm going to highlight today was back in 2023. We did a risk and resiliency assessment of our utility. And we found that we had some cybersecurity issues. And so we approached the Water Resources Board and said, hey, you know what, we'd like to get a Clean Water SRF to fund a project to upgrade our billing, customer information system, our customer call center, our SCADA system, our IVR. So those are not really the stereotypical projects that you might think about Clean Water SRF, but it was a $10.5 million project and it was approved. And so we were successful in implementing those upgrades, and the project is done now. And so, you know, over the years also, we have requested funding to do things like rebuild a spillway that was damaged in 2015 by a huge rain. It just totally destroyed the spillway in one of our water supply lakes. That was a $28 million project. And then we have a dam restoration project. This dam was built in 1917. And so we're doing a restoration on that dam. It's $55 million. And then we've done various wastewater treatment facility upgrades. And also, this is also not really stereotypical, but we're using about $45 million to upgrade our meters to automated meters throughout the city. We have about 250,000 connections to our system. And so, you know, each year what we do is bundle projects and submit them to the water board for consideration. So they're not generally individual projects. We bundle them. So you can tell through my list that we've had success in funding, you know, a variety of projects through the Clean Water SRF.
That's fantastic, Chris. You really get a sense of that variety and flexibility I was mentioning. Tony, let's jump to you to talk a little bit about your experience in Louisville.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Tony Parrott, and I'm the CEO at the Louisville and Jefferson County Metropolitan Sewer District. We are a sewer district here in Kentucky. We're the largest sewer district in Kentucky, and we provide wastewater services to Jefferson County, Bullitt County, and Oldham County. So we serve 3 counties. We also provide stormwater and drainage for Jefferson County and Louisville. And we also provide flood protection along the Ohio River here in Louisville. So we're actually 3 utilities in one. We are operating under a 20-year critical repair and reinvestment plan, which is about a $4 billion capital need. And we're currently under a federal consent decree for combined sewer overflow and sanitary sewer overflow remediation. So we have a lot of challenges. Our current capital budget, 91% of our capital needs are driven by state or federal regulations. And so as all local entities, we have to do the work and we have to find a way to fund it. And right now, unfortunately, fast forward, 40 years from 50 years since the enaction of the Clean Water Act, there's less federal grant money. And so there's got to be other ways that we can move forward and fund these projects. And so what we've tried to do is to look at how we could maximize our use under the state revolving loan fund. There's so many different benefits. And I can tell you that it is an important tool for us as we try to balance our regulatory needs and also dealing with aging infrastructure in our community. And our service area is a mix of urban, suburban, and rural customer areas. And so affordability is a big concern for us. So one of our priority projects is in our flood protection system. It is upgrading a 70-year-old flood pump station that currently protects an area or a watershed of about 65,000 folks. And it is a massive project. Currently, in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, it can pump about 900 million gallons a day. And so as we start to look at the future need and what we need to do, we're actually doing a betterment to that flood protection system. and it is estimated to cost us around $250 million. And so we've been very fortunate to work with our state, Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, and the Kentucky Division of Water to right now secure approximately $100 million for that project under the state revolving loan fund. And approximately 92% of that is going to be under the loan, and 8 million of that is going to be on principal forgiveness. It's a very vital project, and one note is that it was being delivered under a collaborative design build methodology, which all large projects are being done these days. And we were actually the first design build project in the state of Kentucky to be considered for priority funding under the state revolving loan fund. I mentioned that this station is going to be a betterment. We're actually increasing its pumping capacity to 1.9 billion gallons per day. And so that is going to equip us with a design capability to meet a 10-year, 24-hour storm event and really maximize flood resilience in our city for decades to come. I can tell you that without the state revolving loan funds, it would be more expensive for us to deliver this. And so we've been very fortunate to have a great partnership with our state, and the importance of the continuation of the state revolving loan funds under the Clean Water Act is so important right now across the country. And there's really not enough money, whether it be loans or grants, to meet all the needs. But if anything were to minimize or take away this access or funding, it would be catastrophic to us in the wastewater and the stormwater fields.
Those are really important points. Thank you. And a great segue, Lori, for you to provide us with a little bit of perspective from the state, the state view.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Lori Johnson with the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. We are the state administrator in Oklahoma for the Clean Water SRF program. And we've been administering this program since the late 80s, early 90s. And just a little history of the program. This was actually a very visionary program created in the Congress of the time for when we switched from the construction grants days to the state revolving fund program. And as Cynthia mentioned earlier, it was designed to fund projects in perpetuity so that we have a source of forever funding for generations to fund the water infrastructure. When you fund through grants, it's a one-time funding and is unstable from year to year, unstable from year to year on if that grant funding will be available or not. So these are federal state partnerships really designed to have this long-term source of funding. So in Oklahoma, since that time, we've funded almost $3 billion in projects, and we've only received around $475 million in federal funding to support that. So as you can see, it's a small investment on the federal level to have a very large impact at the state and local community level as far as infrastructure financing goes. And with, as Cynthia mentioned earlier, with the below market interest rate requirement, it's essentially a partial grant equivalent. Yes, you have to pay it back, but your borrowing costs are going to be much smaller than if you had to access the bond market on your own or, go to bank funding. You do have to consider, some of the costs of the federal requirements. But in general, I think most communities have kind of absorbed some of those costs. I know states work to streamline those federal requirements a great deal as well. So that's really, for Oklahoma, at least, we have almost a 500% return on investment from those federal dollars that are going out to our communities. And I think nationally it's in the 400% range from year to year on that return on investment. I wanted to talk a little bit about the additional subsidy that Cynthia mentioned earlier. Most states provide that as principal forgiveness. Like I said, these are state-run programs. They're not federal programs. They're federally subsidized programs. But if you provide grant funding under those programs, you have to meet the federal grant requirements. So it's a little bit more flexible if you give principal forgiveness versus grants. In Oklahoma, we leverage our program. So we access the bond market to provide additional capacity to our borrowers so that, anybody that comes into the program is generally able to access funding as long as the project's eligible and they meet our loan term requirements. And so it's some states do that, some states don't. So my biggest advice is really reach out to your state to make sure you understand their program. Every state runs it just a little bit different under the kind of federal framework that's provided to us. Some states do a flat interest rate, and some states do a calculation. In Oklahoma, we utilize the MMD rates, and then we shave 40% off of that for our clean water program. So we calculate those for every loan. And we do that because we issue bonds under the program. We want our interest rates that we're loaning out to be, in the same market as what we're borrowing from. So that's kind of the difference in that. Some states that don't leverage just do a flat interest rate. And let's see, I didn't know if you wanted me to go ahead and talk about kind of the different financings we do in Oklahoma, or wait for kind of the questions.
Yeah, let's wait for the questions.
Okay.
I think it'd be a great moment to move on a little bit and talk about the application process and what that looked like for each of you. So going back to you, Mayor Sheehan, for example, do you have a sense of how long it took you or your team, from submission of your pre-application or letter of interest to closing? Maybe talk about the type of documentation, like just, what was the process like? I know a lot of SRFs, and Lori, I'm sure, can talk about this as well, really do their best to make it as painless as possible, especially for smaller communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the process seemed to go quickly because this visioning for the preserve had been done. And it wasn't until our water commissioner took a look at that visioning and said, wait a minute, we have a problem with what's happening with the combined sewer overflow there. And we'd love to do something. And so it was really just the creativity of seeing a project and then tapping into a source that none of us had ever even talked about because it just wasn't on our radar as a water project. And so we submitted the application in July of 2016. We were awarded the grant, and ours was, I'm not supposed to say grant, I guess, right? Principal forgiveness. We are a hardship, we call it a hardship community in New York State. And so that gives us, the ability to borrow at no interest or to actually receive the principal forgiveness. So that was awarded in February 2017 and executed in October of 2017. So it went, really well, and we moved forward with construction and, had a wonderful ribbon cutting right before COVID. So, but in a way, it actually was a blessing because it was one of those places and spaces that people could go to during COVID and be safe and enjoy. But it kind of got lost in the noise. There are still people who don't know that it's there.
Yeah, so you need that big sign by the train.
Yeah.
Chris, I know you talked about a lot of different projects. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the application process?
Sure. Like I said earlier, we bundle projects and submit a fairly large package to the Water Board every year for consideration. And so from the time that we go to our governing body to request the authority to go after these funds, to the time that we actually close is about 3 to 4 months. But that includes everything, including compiling all the documentation necessary, submitting the application, having the application reviewed by the OWRB, and then going to their board for consideration and approval, and then the closing. So 3 to 4 months is pretty good. When you look at a normal bond sale, you're talking 6, 8, maybe 10 months to go through that process to actually close on that loan.
Yeah. Well, Lori, since this is your state, let's go to you next to get your perspective on the process.
Yeah, so go ahead.
I was just saying, maybe talk a little bit about maybe just some tips, like what would make things go more smoothly? What are you guys looking for in that process?
Yeah, perfect. So typically in Oklahoma, if once an application is submitted to us, it's going to be about 45 days to closing. With our board has to approve it first, and then we go to closing afterwards. So a fairly quick process, turnaround. There is kind of 2 steps, so that adds a little bit of time to the process. Federally, on a federal level, you are required to be on what's called the project priority list before you submit a funding application. Different states do it differently, but our project priority list request is a dollar amount and kind of a brief description of the project, and you get on the list. So it's not a real in-depth process for that piece, but that's generally done several months before actually getting the funding application. So if you're considering that timeline, it's a little bit longer, but once we get the funding application, it's a pretty short turnaround if all the requirements are met, 45 days or so. As far as tips for good applications, like I said, different states do it differently. So my best advice is to communicate with your state and know their process, because some of them may have limited capacity, so they only award funding based on your ranking. So understanding what the ranking process is and what can get you additional points is very important for those states. It is a water quality program, so at least in Oklahoma, some of our ranking criteria is really outside the control of the city. So it's going to be if you're discharging to an impaired water body, or if you're in a vulnerable, source water area or something along those lines, that's going to get additional points. But most states, the readiness to proceed is like the largest point factor. So understanding what steps in the process get you to that readiness to proceed is going to be important. And also making sure that you're communicating with your state on as you go through the process. So if they won't accept an application until maybe you have a permit to construct, you want to make sure you're still working with them ahead of time, in your design documents, et cetera, to make sure you're incorporating the different federal requirements that you have to incorporate into your project, so that you're not required to like rebid or go back and redesign something that you've already worked on. So making sure what all is going to be required in the bid and contract documents is going to be important as well. So those would be the communication piece is going to be very critical, as each state runs their program very differently.
Got it. So Tony, talk with us a little bit about what that process is like in Kentucky. And I think Lori makes a really interesting point about how important it is to communicate with your state SRF. I'd be interested in knowing what your experience is with that.
Yeah, I think Lori is right. The process is different state by state. And of course, in some states where you have more general, conventional type of projects, it goes pretty smoothly. But in our case, particularly with the prior Patty's Run flood protection project that I spoke of, being a large complex project like that, and being that in the state of Kentucky, there's sort of a $20 million annual cap on being able to draw funds. And so it required us to have close coordination with the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority and with the Division of Water staff to make sure that they understood all of the criteria and to make sure that they understood, since this was a design build project, that it was different than anything they've ever done before. And so it took us actually a couple of years to get through the process for this large project. And it started with us really trying to make sure that they understood the profile of the project and making sure that we could work our way through. And so we actually got the invitation in July of 23. We got our letter of commitment October 24. So that's a little over a year. And then we just got our first draw in spring of 2025. And with that annual cap of $20 million, we actually had to phase our draws over a couple of fiscal years, which really doesn't hurt us because a project of that size does take several fiscal years to complete from A to Z. So we were able to work closely with them. We were able to make sure that we could get the regulatory support as well as the infrastructure authority support to understand when we could make the draws and when those draws would be capped so that we could figure out from a cash flow perspective how much construction we could schedule over the life of the project. And so very complex, but I would encourage anyone to make sure that they fully have those transparent discussions on both ends to make sure that you get what you need when you need it.
Got it. So not surprising that larger projects can be more complicated, take more time. That's a really good point. Sort of moving on to another but related subject, we've been talking a lot about these priority project lists. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do to ensure that your project was, rated highly on your state's project priority list. And maybe let's mix up our order a little bit. And Tony, let's just start with you. Like, how did you ensure that how did you make that connection between the project that you needed and the state SRF program's priority list?
Yeah, we tried to really make them understand the age of our infrastructure and the reliability of that infrastructure, particularly with a flood protection project and the inundation area that would be impacted. When you think about 63,000 residents could be impacted if there was a failure of that asset. And so it was really talking about the catastrophic failure of the asset. But since it's sort of integrated with our combined sewer system, we also talked about the quality of life and also the environmental impacts. When you talk about our combined sewer system is really connected with this flood protection system. And so it's not only just flood mitigation, but it's also about water quality improvement and the public health component when you think about potential combined sewer overflow into local streams and rivers. And so it was very important for them to understand that everything that we were doing was well planned out. And we already had a 20-year program in place, sort of our integrated plan, and they could see how that integrated planning platform was connected with our regulatory strategy as well. And so that was the one thing that we think that helped us score very good in the priority scaling project for this project.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Chris, do you want to talk about priority projects in Oklahoma and how you were able to get, because you've got such a large diversity of projects that you've been working with. How do you navigate that?
Sure. So we have a $6 billion capital program. So as you can imagine, we have a long list of projects that need to be constructed and funded appropriately. So we have a direct connect with Lori and her team. We have a very good working relationship with her and her team. And we just make sure that we have a list of shovel-ready projects that we're going to submit with high point scores. And so that's the key to our success. I think everybody's already said it. You need to stay directly in touch with your state agency, the administrative agency, so that you do have a high likelihood of success in securing the SRF loans.
So let me just go right to Lori then. So that's really, so to what extent is that an iterative process, right? You've got your priorities, but it seems like you're also very closely in touch, with your largest utility, and I'm sure many others, about what their priorities are. Talk a little bit about how you develop that priority list.
Yeah, so in Oklahoma, we don't have a capacity issue right now in the clean water program. So at this point, anybody that comes to the program that wants funding, like I said earlier, as long as it's eligible project, eligible entity, and they can meet our financial requirements, they're going to get funding through the program. And so not all states are ran like that. And like I said, we go out to the bond market when we need additional capacity to provide to our borrowers. So we do have a priority list and we do rank our projects. That is a requirement by EPA. But our decisions with those priority rankings are more focused towards like the loan forgiveness to make it more competitive versus just the general loan program as a whole.
Got it. So Mayor, do you want to talk about, because you had such an interesting project, in particular, it sounds like you didn't have any challenges, your project went fast, but do you have any insights into that priority list and how that worked to support your project in New York?
Well, and as you can imagine, New York is a big state with a number of cities. You know, we're the fifth largest city outside of New York City. And so when you think about the cities of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, we're all looking to prioritize projects within our communities. I think one of the advantages of being the capital is that a lot of the decision makers are here. And so my ability to do show and tell, I think I have a little bit of an advantage. The project at the Tivoli Preserve had caught the attention of our Department of Environmental Conservation. They really wanted to bring this preserve back. It had become overgrown. It was being used by people with ATVs and dirt bikes, and it really was something that the community came together and wanted to reclaim as a preserve. So that certainly helped. And then I would say with our other big project where we received a significant amount of funding through that needed that funding was the Beaver Creek Clean River Project, where we basically created a treatment facility upstream on one of our other combined sewer lines so that we would no longer have untreated overflow into the Hudson. And there, having a consent decree helps because the state is telling you you have to do this. We are home to some of the poorest census tracts in our region. And so being able to make the case that, yes, what we're doing is going to benefit the entire region by helping to clean the Hudson River, which is an asset to all of our communities. And that also allowed us to score higher and get the attention of those who were making these funding decisions.
Got it. Got it. So I want to be mindful of time, and I've got a couple more questions for you. Maybe Lori and Chris, we'll start with you on this one. So we've been talking about how the SRF is primarily a loan program rather than a traditional grant program. Can you talk about the financing terms that are generally available? You know, rates of interest, the length of the loan. It sounds like there has been some additional subsidy. Any other interesting loan terms that might be interesting to our participants here today?
Yeah, I can start. So federally, the terms can be up to 30 years for the loan or the weighted life of the assets. So whichever one's the lesser. So you can't do more than 30, but if your assets that you're financing are only going to last 20 years, then you can only do a 20-year loan. And like I said, different states calculate their interest rates differently. Ours are 40% below market at this point. But we offer some different incentive type financings, I guess, as Chris has mentioned a couple of times. They bring to us a package of projects that we finance under one loan transaction. Some states, the traditional way of doing it is, one project, one loan for tracking purposes, et cetera. And that's pretty traditional across the nation, but there has been a wave of what we call programmatic financing that some states do. So what the community can take, their capital improvement plan for their wastewater system, say, and agree to fund or at least construct all of those projects under the SRF guidelines, but pull disbursements for any of those projects in that program. And so that's been several states across the nation have been doing what we call, like I said, programmatic financing. We do it kind of on an identified pool basis as far as like lumping projects together and financing multiple projects under one transaction. There's also been an initiative to finance more non-traditional projects, such as the non-point source projects that we've talked about a little bit today. Some states, including ours, have developed a sponsorship model where Oklahoma City actually utilized this program as well, where they had a traditional wastewater treatment plant project that sponsored the non-point source project. So you identify most non-point source projects don't have a revenue stream and don't have any way of financing those improvements, but they're a huge water quality issue, at least in Oklahoma. And so in order to incentivize that, the states agree to lower the interest rate on the full package of projects so that the repayment is equal to what they would have repaid on just their traditional wastewater treatment plant project. So there's several states that implement that across the nation, like I said, called the sponsorship program, helps incentivize the non-point source programs. So those are the two big ones I wanted to touch on today.
Great. Chris, anything to add?
Sure. From a utility perspective, we're always looking at, what's the impact to the ratepayers. And so, to give you an example, the project I mentioned earlier, the cybersecurity project, the loan was less than 1% with a 0.5% administration fee. Now, we're a AAA rated organization, AAA rated utility, so we get low rates. And so, we have to get a really good deal to beat our rates. Well, we get that with the Clean Water SRF. A couple of advantages that Lori didn't mention. First of all, on a regular bond sale, you have to put 10% escrow up front throughout the duration of the loan. Well, that's a lot of money. When you look at these large projects, and it's all perspective. They don't even have to be in the billions of dollars. But if a small community, if they save several $100,000 or $1 million, that's a lot of money to those small communities. Yeah. And so that's an advantage. And also the loans can be structured so that you pay interest only on the construction portion of the project. And so that's a savings. And you can roll the upfront costs into those loans as well. So you're not getting rid of a lot of cash on the front side as well. So we see a lot of advantage, even, like I said, even though we're AAA rated and we get very, very good rates, we take advantage of the Clean Water SRF here in Oklahoma because they are a really good deal.
Great. Tony, do you want to talk about loan terms that are of particular interest? Any experience with the additional subsidy piece?
Yeah, the one thing that I will just point out is that the interest rates are very, very favorable for us. And in some cases, we're getting them about 1.5% interest. And the fact that, they're so good for us. We have some loans that can run 40 years, but on this particular project, our loans are only running on a 20-year term because the interest rate is so good. And to Chris's point, we have a very good bond rating. And so we can marry that SRF with our traditional bonds, and then we can go after other grant money to supplement. We also have what we call a commercial paper program. And so we have about $500 million of commercial paper capacity that we can tap to supplement some of the SRF funding as well. So it's something that we know that is very flexible. As I said in the beginning, across the country, there's not enough money in the pot to meet the needs. And so the SRF program is definitely a tool that we need to sustain. And we actually need it to be funded at a higher level because there's so many communities that could take advantage of it. So.
Yeah, there was that bump over the last few years, but I know that's temporary.
Yeah.
Mayor Sheehan, do you want to talk a little bit about the terms that you've found to be beneficial?
Well, I mean, certainly being able to qualify for these loans and pay no interest allows us, because this isn't the whole package, as we've heard. These are big projects, and so anytime we can offset what our borrowing is going to be out on the market with an interest-free loan, we're able to really bring that cost down for our ratepayers. And so we're constantly looking at how we can layer things, and we have been also successful in the loan forgiveness. And so when you look at the total cost of a project, right, as a mayor, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, we want to do this and it's going to cost, $50 million or however much it's going to be, it's then breaking it down for the decision makers to say, well, actually, with this funding source, we can take this much of it, and over the next 10 years, 20 years, whatever the term is going to be, look at what this benefit is going to be. And so as a decision maker, it allows us to move forward with some of these capital projects with a lot more confidence that we're going to be able to pay for them.
Well, we're coming very much to the end of our time. So I want to end our time together. I'm not seeing anything in the chat immediately with other questions, but my last question for you is whether you've got just some key nuggets. We've got, several hundred people on this call. Any key nuggets advice for people in other cities who are interested in accessing the SRF? And Mayor, let's start with you.
The community engagement piece is key, and storytelling is really, really effective. And so when you think about some of the projects that you've heard about, whether it's, in Kentucky or in Oklahoma, there's a story that started that ball rolling. And it's really important to keep that narrative through your community, because that's how you gain community support. Whether it's what we saw going into and being discharged into the Hudson River, or the flooding and the decimation that we've seen when we don't do this the right way. There's always a story that starts it, and keeping that narrative at the front, I think, is really beneficial, and it keeps people motivated.
That's awesome. Tony, what about you? Any nuggets?
I think the one thing that I would say to folks is to make sure that you have not only community support, but you have, particularly for utilities under consent decrees, that you have regulatory agency support at the state level, because a lot of times they work very well in concert with the infrastructure authority or whatever agencies that is administering the SRF money, and making sure that they know that you're going to use and deliver and have a project or an outcome that not only is great for the utility, but it's great for the community and for the environment.
Fabulous. Chris, any nuggets for our participant based on your experiences?
Sure. This is a relatively simple process for us. Our administrators do a great job, but we stay connected with them. So, you need that connectivity. You need that relationship with the program administrator. And do your homework. Get all of your reports together. Get all of your engineering completed. Have it shovel ready, and then proceed. And it'll really pay dividends for your ratepayers. It's a really good deal.
That's great. Lori, I wanted to close with you as our as the one panelist who actually runs an SRF programs. What are the nuggets that, and we recognize, we've really emphasized the programs aren't all alike, but any nuggets that you can share?
I guess I'm going to use this opportunity to give my shameless plug for advocating for the SRF programs with your congressional delegates. I know Tony has alluded to that a couple of times, but for those of you not familiar with what goes on a federal level, the last several years, they've been taking, earmark projects out of the SRF allocation, which is eroding into the SRF programs and the benefits that it can provide to our customers. And so it's really important that the constituents hear from, or the congressional people hear from their constituents directly on how important these programs either have been or can be to your cities, and the savings that you can, have with these programs. And so that's my ploy for you all, is to help advocate to save the SRFs from the with federal funding. There was a question in the thing about the Green Project Reserve that I could probably address if you'd like. It says, has there been any indication from the Trump administration to remove or not enforce the Green Project Reserve requirement? I believe that requirement is actually in every year's appropriation bill. It's not actually in the Clean Water Act. So it could be removed. However, once Congress starts doing something, it's really hard to get them to stop doing something. So I haven't heard any indication that it is going to be removed. We've done studies that look at the Green Project Reserve since the history of the program, and most states are well over allocated on that GPR requirement. And so trying to prove to Congress that we're doing these things, even though they're, well above and beyond the actual requirement, so that they could back off of that a little bit. So we have been advocating for that. We will continue to do so, but I haven't heard any indication, but that would be under an appropriations bill. So.
We are exactly at time. I hope you will all join me in thanking our panel. This was fantastic, and it's rare for me to be on a webinar where everybody is in total agreement about a great federal program, but I think you're hearing that this is a great federal program. I'm just going to put in my own little plug, which is that if you have questions, if you need support, reach out to us at Water Now, to Results for America. There's a lot of support out there for communities that want to use their state revolving funds, and we are here for you. So thanks again to the panelists and to Results for America. For
And
putting this
thanks to you, Cynthia. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We hope you'll take a moment to complete the Zoom poll that's on your screen right now. It helps us with our programming moving forward. Please note once again that our next webinar is on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. That'll be November 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Please check out our website, localinfrastructure.org, for the recording, the slides you saw today, and for information about our other upcoming webinars. Thanks so much.